We all want jobs with more freedom, agency, security. Some say the modern workplace offers us all of that. But as global corporations grow even more powerful, many workers are feeling left behind. For them, as it is perhaps for all of us, life is increasingly defined by often invisible algorithms controlled by the few. Is the relationship between corporations, workers, and everyone else moving in the right direction? Or, as today's question asks, are we becoming modern-day serfs? In this episode of Doha Debates, we're joined by experts, global thinkers, each with their own take on this issue.
The question of whether we are free or not depends to a very large extent on our relationship with one another and the relationship with the machinery that we have forged.
Workers are not as free as they are made to believe. We're living under the illusion of choice.
The world we live in today is far more dynamic and innovative, far more saturated with technological progress than the world of feudalism that came before.
In my opinion, today's workers are a very strange bunch. There is greater control over what they do. On the other hand, there is a greater promise of emancipation. Ultimately, it's a combination of both.
Their perspectives will be explored and questioned in a majlis-style debate, grounded in understanding and a search for truth. Now, watching over all of this will be a group of university students and recent graduates. Now, they come from different universities in Qatar Foundation's Education City and beyond, and they've been preparing for this debate.
You can't just call every single thing you don't like about capitalism neo-feudalism.
Our choice to engage with tech companies is absolutely not a choice at all.
Data is our lives, basically. They extract our data and they use it against us.
They are profiting off you even when you are scrolling on your phone, when you're at work. No matter what you do, they are going to get money out of you like a towel just dripping it dry.
After our guests finish their debate, the students will reflect and deliberate before returning with their own insights, ready to challenge, agree, or offer entirely new perspectives. I'm Imran Garda, and this is Doha Debates. Good to have you all on the program. A warm welcome. A lot of people are trying to figure out, is this a fundamentally new era? Is it a continuation of something that's the same, or is there something in the ether that's fundamentally different? That's why we're having this debate. Evgeny Morozov, those 10 students, they've got their whole lives ahead of them. Should they be worried?
Of course they should be. Everyone, I think, who has observed changes in the global and especially digital economy over the last few decades should be concerned about the growing concentration of power in the hands of these companies, about our inability to question their projections for the future, about their celebration of extremely individualistic ideology that imagines all of us as atomized individuals rather than collectives, about the power that they have accumulated over infrastructures such as artificial intelligence. All of that, I think, merits quite serious concern, because we do know from history that corporations, in many cases backed by powerful nation states who enjoy so much power, do tend to abuse it.
Is it because capitalism has ended, or is this an extension of capitalism? Yanis Varoufakis.
It depends on how you define capitalism, but this is neither nor here. As far as the students are concerned, as far as the audience is concerned, the question is, are we experiencing something like a major transformation that, let's say, wasn't around 20 years ago or 30 years ago? And my view is that over the last 10, 15 years, we have seen something quite remarkable emerge, a new form of capital, a mutation of capital. It's not a produced means of production. Amazon.com, the algorithm in Amazon or in Zuckerberg's Meta and so on, it doesn't produce anything except the power which is vested in the owner of that cloud capital directly to modify our behavior. This is the first time in human history that we have machines dialectically related to us. We train them to train us, to train them, to train us, to train them, to impress us, win our trust, and then directly modify our behavior and even sell us things bypassing markets. That's not capitalism anymore, and therefore it is for them to be worried and excited by the prospect of having to tame this new form of machinery so they can become its masters, not to be its serfs.
My concern is that isn't the algorithm just a reflection of society? Yeah. And nothing has changed at all.
Who wants to tackle that, whether the cloud capital is fundamentally more dangerous than terrestrial capital?
Can I just pick up on a word there, which was excitement? And I think, just if I was sitting there as a student, the challenge that I face is that there is a dilemma unfolding. On the one hand, the technological progress that's taking place for the reasons we've just heard has a price associated with it. But we've also got to remember its extraordinary promise as well. We live at a time of remarkable technological change. Almost every day we hear stories of systems and machines taking on tasks and activities that until recently we thought only human beings alone could ever do. They're making medical diagnoses and driving cars, drafting legal contracts and designing buildings, composing news reports and writing music. We have never invested so much financial capital, so much human talent in the pursuit of one technical problem like artificial intelligence.
I don't see
Name
it.
one opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. I don't
Very
see
idealistic.
Which edge of that double-edged sword is sharper, Nanjira?
I wanted to pick up on promise. Because the thing about promise is it can also be elusive. So the algorithms that we're saying we've invested so much talent into delivering progress are not necessarily reflective of a vast majority of people's realities. So they've not also been involved in showing us other ways of arriving at this moment that's supposed to be so great. The challenge we do have today is that indeed global corporations are pushing themselves, asserting themselves in some of our realities, and sometimes we don't even have a say. It is still a continuity around when do we get to have self-determination? These are the nuances around which we should dive deeper into this conversation that could also offer us the promise that Daniel is speaking about.
I don't understand how the progress that he mentions is so good for our world.
There are individuals out there who want to live in this delusional land that somehow everything's perfect and we should just learn to adapt and use this technology to create self-driving cars and stuff.
And if we go by the meaning of his progress, because there's like different meanings of progress that I see. But even his, it doesn't seem very bright and shiny to me.
I am skeptical of the idea of cloud capital for a number of reasons. First of all, of course, the reason why we would want to think about different kinds of capital is because it would allow us to predict its behavior in some way so that we, as subjects affected by it, whether as citizens or trade unions or collectives of neighbors, could somehow chart our response to it. So the question then becomes, to what extent framing the activities of technology companies as cloud capital is productive? It projects a somewhat misleading, dematerialized view of these companies as operating through
Evgeny,
algorithms.
no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Well,
it's a metaphor. Cloud is a metaphor.
Well, it's a metaphor, but it's a metaphor.
I make very
Yanis.
clear that it is totally material capital. It's optic fiber
For sure,
cables.
but then why do you call
it is
it
server
cloud?
farms.
I mean, the
It is
entire-
machinery.
Sure,
it doesn't live in the cloud.
For sure, it doesn't live in the cloud, then why call it cloud capital?
Yeah, but it's a metaphor. It's a
Well,
metaphor.
it's a
It's a totally
metaphor. That's what
material
I'm saying.
capital.
So we have
what's a better
companies
metaphor?
It's a totally
investing-
material capital.
If you look at Amazon, they're investing like crazy in not just data centers, into retail
but that's
centers,
completely consistent with
into
my
real
definition of
estate.
cloud capital.
Oh, he's not letting
Now
them
we know
talk.
why they tell us not to fight.
Well, again,
Totally
I'm
consistent.
trying to ask, what predictive value framing it as cloud serve? Does it rain?
Well, firstly,
Is there
it's not
snow
only a
coming out of it? What does calling it a cloud? How does it help us?
A steam engine,
Sure.
to understand it as a produced means of production, is essential in order to understand its function.
Sure, but there is steam coming out of steam
Predictively,
engine.
you can then you move on to predict what effect the steam engine will have on society, whether it would bring about the industrial revolution. So what I'm saying about cloud capital is that it is a totally material thing. It lives not on the cloud, it lives on land, in the oceans, on the seabed, and its function is not to produce stuff or other machines, but to produce the power by which the capitalist has direct access to modifying our behavior.
But
Something
this
that
thing-
once upon a time,
Sure,
Henry
you've
Ford
explained
didn't,
that.
because Henry Ford had to employ a clever advertiser to do it. Now, through the Amazon algorithm, through the meta-algorithm, the machine itself engages in a relationship with you, and you train it to train it, and it's not just data extraction.
Sure.
That's why I go
you
far beyond
you
surveillance.
explained that well, and
So
again,
the
I challenge...
Cloud capital is a reality.
Glad we sorted that out. The fixation on the algorithm and the fixation on the user-consumer of the service, I think is misleading because it presents a snapshot of the digital economy. As it has been, maybe between the years 2004 and 2015, which was heavily oriented towards consumers, buying stuff, being shown ads. We know that in the case of Amazon and in the case of Google and many of these other companies, and increasingly most of the revenue and profits that they make comes from them selling services. Services to companies who do make stuff.
That's true. Yeah.
So if you look at Amazon, much of the revenue and profit that they actually make comes from them selling fulfillment services, delivery services, cloud services, which involves a lot of activities that companies need. Capitalism doesn't disappear. There were a lot of other companies in the pre-internet era, FedEx, UPS. Were they making any stuff? They weren't. Were they involved in the real economy of companies producing things? Sure. How is Amazon different? When Amazon allows people to ride on its infrastructure of fulfillment centers, of deliveries, of web servers, to manufacture, assemble, and distribute goods. How is it cloud capital? This is normal capitalism, which has existed all the time, with Amazon using all sorts of digital tools and platforms to make their business more efficient, but they're performing the same function as many of the other intermediaries, broken businesses and broken commerce across businesses have done across history.
I did like the fact that they mentioned Amazon algorithm. I don't think I've heard anyone talk about it in detail on a platform, on an international platform. Usually experts shy away from speaking about it.
I have my own startup. So this is like literally right there, right? Like when Yanis talks about cloud rents, I'm like, yes, I have been hit with that AWS bill so many times.
I was thinking about the moment we live in. I think of it as a world of competition, of innovation, of technological progress.
Well, I'm sorry, but we don't live in a rapidly developing world. We live in a stagnating world. Big tech is developing very rapidly. So AI is developing very rapidly. But when you look at the things humanity truly needs, from green energy to green agriculture, we are stagnating.
I disagree. I disagree.
One last point. We have
I disagree fundamentally.
If you give me a moment, because we can get stuck in the definition of it for a long, long time, right? So I just want to move it up, because there was a particular word that was used, stagnation. And Nanjira, you tell me why the word stagnation elicited a response from you.
I think of it as, I guess maybe for a second here, we get to look at what's happened in some parts of the global south. Yeah. The self-determination and all the promises of ideas like capitalism were supposed to also flow to these regions and didn't happen. If the values that we say are supposed to govern this world, including even in innovation and so on and so forth. Why then have we not been able to say that we can see, not even just decentralized, but different spheres of arriving at this moment? You find that the challenge is you have gone through the markers of success. You were told, go to school, get a degree, and it will open up this reality of these places to you. It is not universal, right? It's not universal.
For them listening, is the game rigged?
The game is rigged. I think they would agree that the game is rigged.
Not only was the system rigged, when I was in corporate, it was also racist. I don't think people truly understand how bad it is until you've actually been in like a corporate firm. But again, I don't want to, it's not bad entirely, right? Like I don't think that you can't succeed. I do think that your efforts do play a role. However, when it comes to like the top executives, when it comes to like all the real decision maker, quite like they all look the same. And you will not find like people that look like me there. Quite frankly, you won't find a lot of women there either. And I think that is by design.
Conventional idea is that rule of law and democracy are still good vehicles or tools in order to fix, control, reform these problems. That still many governments, especially representative democracies, have the ability to take that ship and reorient it. Are we losing faith in that? Is government capable, able to fix these issues?
Framing it this way creates certain artificial dichotomies, and that's the juxtaposition of the corporation versus the state. It doesn't really work that way. If you look at the United States and if you look at China, it's obvious that there is a symbiosis between the state agendas and the corporate agendas. And it's not a new development. It's unfair to be picking up a country that's not the United States or not China and be telling them, well, little Norway or little Denmark, why don't you take on the tech giants? Because if you take on the tech giants, you're also taking on the United States. We have to understand that some countries are more equal than others, but we also have to understand that the symbiosis that exists between some companies and some countries is definitely greater than in other places.
I think Yanis will agree with you on this one.
Of course.
And I feel like we
don't
in this
disagree on
conversation, so far we haven't looked at the perspective of a people, right? And whether it's workers or just citizens in a democracy or in any context, right? And where their power comes into this. And I'll use the example of the content moderators who've been doing the data editorial work to make it possible for OpenAI and others to have these algorithms and generative models that we're all supposed to use today. Their agency to require, say, the Kenyan government to stand up to these tech companies and demand fair wages is considered practically impossible. For the Kenyan government to step up to that, something else might be squeezed out of them.
She brought our focus back to, in some countries, young people are being exploited for below minimum wage and labor. Like, for example, Kenya, it could be as little as $2 a day for sifting through content that would eventually damage their mental health.
It's true that people are losing faith in democracy, but the answer to that is more democracy rather than less, a kind of richer conception of democracy. These questions about what directions we take. So the best way to resolve these questions is to put it to citizens.
Can I share my experience regarding your question?
Yes,
about
please.
democracy and the rule of law?
Please.
It's a figment of our imagination. When you find yourself in these corridors and these rooms where decisions are being made at the highest level, the International Monetary Fund, the European Union, the United States and White House and so on, the rules are changed in real time depending on the equilibrium of power. The demos is treated with contempt. When the demos comes up with the right answer, it's fine, we have democracy. When the demos in a referendum or in an election votes for something that the agglomeration of power doesn't want, it is completely overthrown, overturned. If I can contribute something from my experience is this. I found myself in the position of being the finance minister of the most bankrupt country in the middle of a pan-European bankruptcy, okay? So it wasn't a very good moment. But it was, because it was such a tense moment, it was quite revealing. So essentially what happened was Wall Street had collapsed in 2008, then the German and the French banks collapsed a few months later, then the Greek state collapsed. And what I saw with my own eyes, it was quite fascinating, and I want to share it with the students just for a second, is that the very same people who had brought about the Wall Street collapse, people who had worked in Lehman's, for instance, creating these weapons of mass financial destruction, as Warren Buffett put them, the very same people were employed by the European Union to construct similar derivatives in order to bail out the banks using taxpayers' money in Europe. So failure is rewarded amply, and the failed machinery is being reconfigured in order to cover the causes of the failure. That is exactly the opposite of what democracy. So the fact that you have elections is simply a cover for the complete radical absence of democracy.
Let's do one final round of everybody else here chiming in on that final point, and then we'll wrap this section of the discussion. Daniel?
Sure. For 300,000 years, human life was essentially stagnant. So whether you were, a hunter-gatherer working away in the Stone Age or a laborer working away in, feudal times just before the start of the Industrial Revolution, although your lives would have differed in lots of respects, fundamentally from an economic point of view, it would have been remarkably similar, a sort of relentless, unforgiving struggle for subsistence. And that only really changes a few hundred years ago with the Industrial Revolution in Britain. It's the first time in human history we see economic growth that's both significant and sustained. As if some long kind of pent-up productive power is finally unleashed. The only way in which we were able to unleash that productive power was through capitalism.
So the slave trade had no role to play in this? Or the enclosures, for instance?
No, I don't think those are serious explanations for the start of modern economic growth. That's a bigger conversation, but no. The question is, can we redirect capitalism? Can we channel flourishing, the sort of flourishing that you want, in the capitalism that we have? Or do you need another entirely different system to enable that capitalism? My argument would be it's only through capitalism that we can both nurture and
isn't
direct
it a
that
theological
flourishing.
position? I mean, there is no empirical ground to believe that. It's some kind of possible. It's a theological position, like you can believe or not believe in God.
I'd say it's a philosophical position rather than a theological one.
No, I would absolutely say that we have to add the addendum that capitalism unleashed during the first industrial revolution was at the cost of slavery, was the cost of disruption. And that is something that we're struggling with and contending with today. Capitalism for thee, but was not capitalism for me.
For me, it's obvious that there are obvious limits to capitalism. Capitalism recognizes me as a subject in only 2 or 3 identities: as an entrepreneur, as a consumer, as an investor. I don't exist in any other identity for capitalism. I don't exist as a parent. I don't exist as a neighbor. I don't exist as a citizen. All of those become secondary.
Or as a biological being that needs to breathe.
Which also means that all of the acts of creativity and innovation that can undertake in those identities don't exist and don't get valorized. So for me, the only way to be creative and to feel really at the top of my game is to be an entrepreneur. I go and I found a startup. I valorize my creativity that way, which forces me to accumulate data from my users and to find ways to sell it, to commodify. And right now, digital technology, in opening up at least the visibility of other ways of being creative in the world, shows the limitations of capitalism as well. And I think we have to be very attentive to those because it opens up entirely new ways of being that transcend traditional socialism, that transcend traditional communism, that open up new ways of actually being and acting in the world that enhances what came before and opens up new ways of feeling and being and acting.
Okay, let's put a pin in that for the moment. I thank you all so much. Throughout this debate, as we've said, our students and recent graduates have been carefully listening to all these ideas and arguments. Now, next up, I'm going to go and join them next door as they reflect and deliberate on what they've just heard. After that discussion, they'll return back here with me to share their own perspectives along with some questions and maybe even challenges.
I believe 100% we live in a techno-feudal world.
It affects all of us. But also this is like one of those rare topics where it's like, you know, like there's so much that's unknown.
We can't even explain how dangerous it is to live in a world like this. But normal people like me and you and everyone, all of our lives are on the line.
Hi, guys. Passionately discussing the conversation. Good to see you all again. Mudassir, what did we miss in that conversation?
So what we were really missing in that conversation was the lived experience of people. We talked a lot about politics, we talked a lot about innovation. What was missing was the lived experience. How do people under the techno-feudalism or hyper-capitalism, however you want to define it, how do they actually feel? What are the sort of decisions they make because of the realities they're facing, right? Like, oh, can they speak up out of fear of losing their jobs? Do things they said on Twitter as a 13-year-old matter for their prospects, or like economic prosperity, or like even like social prosperity?
I think one of the big things that sort of the debate was touching on, which was sort of, I think, some of the overarching failures of capitalism or liberal democracy today. There is a reality that actually, like, we don't really have a say over how the economy works, right? Our economy is not democratic. And so I think that's really the heart of what we're talking about. When you go to work, the very concept of democracy is integrated into how you live your life, unlike the way it is today, where we kind of separate politics and economics, where it's like politics is the thing that we can have input in, but economics is left up to these private individuals, when in reality, like, that's the thing that impacts us the most. That's our daily life when we go to work. Why don't we have a say over that?
I think that what was missing from the debate as a whole, I think, was the question of, do we have neo-serfs right now? And I think if you look actually down at the general population, most people consider the way they're living as kind of like a neo-serf, if not even worse, right? Before you had kind of a whip to your back, etc. You have to work now, etc. But now what do we have? We have a situation wherein, number one, in order to actually pay for anything, you need to take a loan. Number two, This loan, you have to pay for it every single month, etc. Number 3, if you stop working, you can't make your payments, right? Are we really living lives that different from the feudal serfs? Or is it just that we've changed kind of like the terminology that we're using, right? Rather than someone actually forcing us, we've actually just had a change in the vibes of our slavery, rather than an actual change in the slavery, right?
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is there's a concentration of power. That power is concentrated among certain individuals or certain corporations, right? What does this mean for your average person, your day-to-day person? If I may pose that question.
What does it mean for you? What does it mean for you?
For me, I think of things like the fact that people my generation, me specifically, become very dependent on technology for like our day-to-day services that we use, the amount of information that I have online about myself, be it personal information or just information that's obtained through means of like tracking, algorithms that track your behavior and your usage, and what that means for my future. Will there ever come a time where that very data might be used against me or might be used to tweak like my behaviors,
I share Soha's fears about data. Anything that you say, you can't express yourself anymore without the fear of something in the future like being picked apart and used against you. I just want to take that same mechanism and that understanding and apply it to being enslaved to companies as a consumer. I think about boycott for BDS movement for Palestine. And when you're boycotting all these conglomerates, like all these corporations, they own every single company almost. So boycotting becomes so difficult because you're like, what do I do at this point? Because these companies own all the little companies. So even if somebody pops up with a little small brand, either that brand is not able to flourish or is like sucked into this big corporation. So how do I boycott anymore? So I'm enslaved to these companies, yes. I think we are slaves. Slaves in the sense of how we consume things. I think we're slaves in the sense of where we work. Even in the sense of like the language I'm speaking in right now is the language of my colonizers. So yeah, we are slaves in every single walk of our life.
I feel like we're losing our sense of self altogether. Our sense of self belongs to these private companies right now. And what's happening is they're taking the data as capital and then they're profiling us. So what happens is they sell it to, like, for example, advertisement companies or like political consultant who look at our data and then see what kind of political messaging is this person susceptible to, right? So I feel like our sense of self is being degraded and our ideas are kind of being, influenced by corporate interests altogether.
My perspective is that capitalism is actually healthier. However, I really do believe that some things within a country should be right. As a Qatari citizen, you have the freedom to be able to do your business, to be able to do anything you want. However, as a Qatari citizen, you have the right to land because this is your country. At the end of the day, right? You have the right to electricity, even like in terms of food, right? That the government will be able to subsidize you. All these things, I believe, if you're living on the land, you're a contributing person, they should be right. They should be something that you are owed by living, by existing, etc. Well, everyone's greedy. Everyone wants to make money. There will always be people who will take advantage of whatever system you create. However, there needs to be checks and balances in order to ensure that people are not abused. They're not taken advantage of.
Because human beings are just motivated by monetary gain?
Yeah, no, definitely. Everybody wants to be comfortable. Hard work, essentially, the reason why the majority of people work hard is because they want to do better than other people. Why would I work 10 times harder than my peer if at the end of the day, we're going to have the same finish line? The reality is, this is an unfeasible mindset to have, and this is literally just like wishful thinking.
Okay, Hamid, so through your understanding, I'm a teacher
so
because I'm trying to work.
Sarah, Sundus.
So I'm a teacher, right? Who's my competition? Who am I trying to outperform?
Your personal perspective is not like a representative of the entire population. The entire population.
I'm a human being at the end of the day, contributing to the economy, right?
I'm talking about societally. I'm talking about as like
I'm contributing to society more importantly.
I'm talking about as a trend. The majority of people, when they're working, they want to be compensated for their work at a rate that is contingent with their effort, right? The majority of people, why don't they go into education? Like, for example, like a lot of the best and brightest, why do they not choose to go into education? Because it has not been made profitable, right? Why do a lot of people go into, for example, like medicine, etc.? Because it has been made profitable. That's why you have the highest GPAs, etc., choosing these fields that have the highest career, the highest career potential.
I graduated with first-class honors from British University, and I still chose to go into education.
But you're an exception to the rule rather than the actual rule itself.
Finish your point, Soha. Finish your point.
Yeah, so it's just a question I wanted to pose to him. I don't think human beings are necessarily driven by monetary gain or wanting to outperform other people.
People, especially those like graduates like me who are just starting out, we need to realize that we can do a lot more things. We need to realize that even though we could say that we're powerless or we don't have like a joystick for power or anything like that, I think there's a lot we could do in the workplace. There's a lot we could do in changing ourselves. we could also unionize the workplace and ask our fellow workers to, rally up against.
Right.
and
Okay. So in the hold on. So in the spirit of people power, voting, unionizing, I want a show of hands here. Your students, recent graduates, some of you have jobs right now, but you will undoubtedly have possibly other jobs after this. You're at that beginning phase. Raise your hands here if you are afraid of what's to come in that job market. If the job market out there in this modern world, if it scares you, raise your hand.
I don't think I'm going to find a job after this episode.
Okay.
I'm studying medicine.
Semi.
I'm studying social sciences. It has no place in the modern world. If I could do any job in the world without having to worry about money or anything, I would honestly just, I don't know, work at a library, make coffee, and every now and then go to community centers and give back to the society.
It would still be the job that I'm planning on doing one day, which is going into academia and being a history professor.
I would love to cover the atrocities happening in West Bank and Gaza and Palestine. I would tell my younger self not to be afraid and to take up space. I think life is too short. So I just want to really emphasize not being afraid and doing my best to get outside my comfort zone to do what is right.
A lot of old people need companionship. A lot of orphans need companionship. I think for me, my dream job would be to just work on the community because we give some and we take some, and that would be the most ideal way of living for me.
We're out of time, and I want you to save some of your best challenges and points for our panel on that side themselves. Save it for that. Are you ready to meet the 4 distinguished guests over there? Are you ready to challenge them, talk to them, and learn from them? Okay, yalla, let's go. Okay. This is the moment of truth. Like that. You're really gonna like it. Okay, welcome everybody. We've got our students and recent graduates. Just to let our guests know, what I did is I got a show of hands on that side and I asked them who was afraid of what was ahead in the workplace and entering the workforce or even going up the ladder in the workforce, and the vast majority raised their hands. Whoever raised their hands, you want to just raise your hands again just to show, right? Okay, so we don't have to talk about, okay, there was a shui there over there. But so Yanis, what then is the solution for them as they enter this world of neo-feudalism?
Not neo-feudalism. I don't believe in neo-feudalism. I call it techno-feudalism.
Because he wrote the book called Techno-feudalism.
Yes, well, because I don't believe that we've gone back.
This system, whatever we call it, what's the solution?
What is the solution to the problems we're facing today, let's say, right?
Okay.
Well, firstly, a stiff upper lip. You will need it. These are tough times. But it seems to me that you talked about economic agency and about your concern as to whether you will be agents when you work for some corporation or wherever it is that you work. So the answer to that is economic democracy, which is exactly the opposite of the capitalist structure, where you have as many votes in the shareholders meeting as the dollars you can muster in order to buy the shares.
Well, I think whatever system it is that you're in, don't be afraid of being anti-systemic. And I think ultimately we're living through times of crisis, but those are arguably the best times to be anti-systemic because the system is caught off guard. In addition, I do think that artificial intelligence, to some extent, even as it exists now with all its limitations, it's opening up all sorts of possibilities that the capitalists and the owners of the system have not been prepared for. I don't think that the traditional capitalist argument that the market is the only way to organize society can actually hold if you take artificial intelligence on board seriously. There are all sorts of ways to challenge the system that I think you shouldn't be afraid of exploring, and the system is actually far more fragile than it appears to be.
I actually have a question for Dr. Susskind. When we talk about climate change, the most pressing issue of our time, we're thinking about not technology, I would argue. I mean, we have the technology to make a green transition, but the question is, are we going to do it? And so we've been sitting around kind of begging these corporations, please transition. I'll give you subsidies. I'll do this, I'll do that. and we're kind of betting our futures on them. We're dealing with an economic system that relies on infinite growth, but living on a finite planet. Why would the solution not then, Dr. Varoufakis said, the idea of having a democratic economy, right? Why not kind of have, people run their workplaces?
I think there is a sense that many parents have, and I speak as a parent of 3 kids, that it's not given that the future my children will inherit will be better than my own. And that's quite a dangerous situation you have when people lose faith in the future. There is still a sense in which we live in a moment in time which is incomparable in many ways to the moment that almost all of our ancestors lived, almost the entire span of human history. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. But I also think it's right that something feels off now. But my view, quite firmly, is not that that means we ought to, throw out capitalism.
I agree. Like the development of capitalism was, it was a positive development. And you know what? You agree with Karl Marx. Like
Indeed.
he also
Absolutely.
thinks that
the first 4 pages of the manifesto.
I think we can recognize that, okay, we've made all these developments now, but like I said, the problems in those times were we didn't really have the resources, right? But that's not the problem that we have today, is it, though? We have all these resources. It's not like we're poor. Humanity is incredibly rich. But it's a question of who's getting the resources,
There are
though.
extraordinary numbers of people around the world who live in extreme poverty, even
Because the wealth is being hoarded, not because the wealth is not there.
Because if we map who those are and what their history in that trajectory that you're speaking of is, it is about extraction of resources. It's extraction of what they could have determined for themselves to be accumulated elsewhere, and maybe some scraps will come back to them. But even say for Africa, I love to say it's not a poor continent, it's a mismanaged one. This is impoverishment at this point, to your point, because we have the knowledge, we have the resources, we have know-how, everything, but the fact that the status quo remains and gets worse is a function of impoverishing.
In the spirit of just kind of, challenging and debating, I'm not naive, and I've written at great length about the kind of costs and dangers associated with technology. What we confront is a tension between the price of these technologies, but also the promise. So in the medical setting, for example, the system that was developed at Stanford a few years ago, which if you give it a photo of a freckle, it will tell you as accurately as leading dermatologists whether or not that freckle is cancerous. So that's now a system that can give anybody with a smartphone access to the kind of medical expertise that in the past would have required a prohibitively expensive consultation. One of the great promises of the new generative systems that are available, that they offer access.
I need to interject on this. We should neither emphasize the cons nor underemphasize the pros. But we shouldn't take away from the sense that I gather from you folks of the rise of fear.
Dr. Yanis, I just wanted to add to your point. If we actually look at today's world as a young person, it's so hard for me to be optimistic, is because a lot of these workers are trading in their freedom for convenience. But we've seen the workers who took a stance, like for example for Palestine, right, against the Israeli genocide of Palestinians, they have faced major consequences. These tech companies are responsible for the technology being provided to target and kill Palestinians. Either it's AI to track facial recognition in the West Bank, or literally targeting civilian homes in Gaza. And when we see employees try to take a strong stance against it, or even as simple as putting a social media post, they're being silenced, they're being fired, there's no autonomy. What do you do in this case when you have literally the worst genocides happening in today's world against the people of Gaza? How do you defend it without losing your livelihood?
If I could just quickly add to that point as well. Dr. Varoufakis, you also mentioned about how algorithms create fiefdoms because they basically create ways in which people get separated with each other based on the information that algorithm perceives. So a right-wing person would see right-wing news, a left-wing person would see left-wing news. And I think it's the same with Palestine as well. There are certain knowledges that have been privileged by the algorithm, while other knowledges have just been completely kept out, right? How do we beat that algorithm?
The situation we're facing today is not that different to the situation we faced in the past. There were tyrannies, forever. And there were young people who had to make the ethical choice at some point, either to conform, either to adapt themselves to the tyrant's wishes in order to move up in the world, or to clash with the tyrant, at the expense of even their life. Well, maybe you will lose your job at Google, But, you know, this is going to create a kind of internal process of real self-realization that will lead you to do something else, which will, in the end, produce a better life than the life of a well-remunerated Google employee. But, you know, that's a personal ethical choice that you have to make. The answer to your question is to get together, to create collectives where we use our own AI, our own programs, in order to do exactly what you've been working on, which is to create interfaces that allow knowledge to be disseminated.
The problem isn't the technology itself. The problem is what it's used for, where it's heading, right? We can try and fix it as much as we want, but someone's always going to have to be on the bottom.
I think Amir kind of stepped on my point. But like
I was looking at your feet for a second.
But like, I want to go back to Dr. Susskind. Like, I appreciate and acknowledge the pros of what technology brings for us. I realize that. But who is that progress for? Who has access to that progress? And at what cost? I can enjoy what comes with technology and use my iPhone as much as I want, but what kids are dying for that? Like, who is being enslaved for me to be able to use this technology to better my life?
What I'm trying to encourage you to do is to recognize that we can influence the sorts of technologies that we develop in society. So let me give an example. Demis Hassabis last year won the Nobel Prize at DeepMind for solving the protein folding problem. Now, you just can't dismiss that. This is a system that has solved a problem which is just so fundamental for our collective understanding of disease and how to treat it.
One of the problems with this kind of discourse about technology and society is that we fail to remember that looking at technologies is a little bit like a Rorschach test, that all of us see in their histories and their trajectories whatever we want to see. It is not obvious in many of the examples you've mentioned, like the app at Stanford, what's the meaning of this app? I mean, is the meaning of the story that somehow capitalism is good because it allows us to cure cancers through innovative apps? Or is the story that, well, there is someone at Stanford who managed to somehow free ride on public money that we gave to Stanford and use IP law to carve out a patent and then monetize something that should have belonged to all of us?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what's the meaning of that story. And I'm not sure what's the meaning of the DeepMind anecdote.
Yeah.
And also the Google example you gave, yes, a remarkable AI technology that they developed in order to cure particular diseases. But at the same time, Google is reorienting itself and essentially becoming part of the Israeli biometric data processing system that selects targets in Gaza with a view to maximize casualties. So this thing goes together.
I recognize that, you know, technology obviously has benefits, and we've all, you know, enjoyed these privileges, and it did a lot of good. But at the same time, when tech companies do harm, do we just look the other way because we want to enjoy this level of comfort and not question it?
How do we engage with this technology that is supposedly progressive and amazing, and just we have to be so optimistic about it, when this same technology is being used to erase the realities of people who are living under an apartheid state, people who are being murdered? Like, when these technologies, which are supposed to like help us know more and expand our horizons and get more knowledge, is actively erasing evidence of a genocide. Like, how do you feel optimistic about such a tool? It's an evil tool when you think of it that way.
This is the final lap of the program. Today we asked, has something fundamentally changed about the power structures we live under, or is it just an old system, new name? And now conversation has come full circle. Now, speakers, you have shared your vision, you've listened to each other, and you've heard your ideas echoed, questioned, and reimagined by the next generation. Now, we want to sort of close this by getting some takeaways from our guests, and start with Evgeny. What was it like to interact with the students and recent grads? Anything stand out for you?
I was actually very much encouraged by the degree of critical thinking and I guess discontent with the current system we're living in. So that has given me hope. Where I guess I probably diverge from the mainstream interpretation that I've heard is that I do think that there is a danger of othering, if you will, the time that we're living in as somehow being exceptional. And that's why, you know, I fundamentally disagree with the techno-feudalism thesis. Because if you are someone who experienced capitalism in the global south in the 1950s or 1960s, and you experienced American or German, telecommunication companies or sugar companies or car companies, believe me, you would not look at them as favorably as if you were a West German experiencing capitalism in Germany and in North America. So capitalism has always relied on surveillance. It has always relied on colonial forms of policing. It has always relied on extraction, pillaging, and doing a lot of things that go beyond buying and selling labor through a contract. And I think we have to understand that a lot of our theories of capitalism, unfortunately, still come from the global north. And they do exclude a lot of these experiential dimensions. And that's why I think that the ultimate danger of framing it as a techno-feudalist paradigm is that it ends up whitewashing capitalism, which does have a lot of sins, and we should not forget that they exist.
Nanjira?
It's amazing to see what I think is a rewilding, a remoralizing, and a repoliticizing of everything. You know the saying, the kids will be all right? You will be all right, because you're doing it at such a foundational time.
I suppose the one thing I'd want to leave you with is just quotation that from Derek Parfit, that we have the power not just to make life good in decades to come, but to make it better in ways that we now cannot even imagine.
Yanis?
Well, because of the interaction with you folks, I'm leaving much happier than I entered this debate. It was refreshing, in particular, because you had the courage to talk about the genocide that is unfolding as we speak, because our generation's moral, ethical clarifier will be whether we can stand by the Palestinian people, in the same way that in 1938, 1939, the moral clarifier for that era was whether we would be able to stand by the Jewish people when they were facing
I must say, as somebody whose family were killed in the Holocaust, I find that comparison inappropriate. But
well, I find it absolutely appropriate, and we can agree to disagree on this. Now, every generation also has a tendency to overestimate the significance of the moment when it is graduating. So my generation, generations before that, always felt that we were on the cusp of a major transformation. But occasionally, there comes a generation which is on the cusp of a major transformation. And I do believe that having machines that talk to one another and which are directly in a dialectical interface with us, bypassing the marketplace, that marks out a very special moment in history. As far as you're concerned, your generation, this is not a deterministic path which you have to walk. Everything could be different, and I cannot think of a more revolutionary sentence than that. Everything could be different.
I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us. It's been fascinating. That brings us to the end of this episode of Doha Debates. Thank you to our speakers, our students, and of course, all of you for watching and listening. We have explored bold ideas, we've challenged assumptions, we've opened up some space for understanding and maybe even continuing disagreement, but we've done it with respect and curiosity at the center, and I appreciate that from all of you here. But the conversation does not end here. Now, it's your turn. What do you think? You can share your thoughts, your questions, or your perspectives. We're listening. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
What happens to us? I have no idea.
I'm very worried about the future.
I'm worried about the future. I think that we're living in a world that is becoming increasingly less free.
Best case scenario, we have more leisure time. Worst case scenarios is we become slaves to the robots. Yeah, which sounds a bit morbid, my bad. If I watch this in like 25 years' time, I'm so sorry. But yeah, either or. There might be a middle ground, who knows?